Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free. And that is exactly what we do on this show. My name is Stephanie Edmonds, and tonight I am here with Kevin Hammer. He is the New York chapter leader for Gays Against Groomers. He also has a pretty cool YouTube channel himself called The Issues Left to Right. And we're here tonight to talk about an important issue, and that is protecting children from transgender ideology generally, but specifically from the medical interventions. And there's some pretty big updates on that front, both here. I'm in Connecticut and New York, and we recently met up in Albany
Mhm.
fighting some of these bad bills. But there's also some good news coming from the other coast. In California, they're actually working on a ballot initiative to ban a lot of this stuff and increase parental rights. So we're going to get into all of that stuff. I want to remind people who are coming into this stream to hit that like button. If you're new, just happening upon this channel, go ahead, subscribe, and let us know either in the live chat or in those comments down below your thoughts on these issues. But Kevin, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. I gave a little intro, but go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to this topic.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I do want to give a shout out though to my co-chapter leader for Gays Against Groomers New York. Because we obviously I'm not alone in this. Amaya, she is my co-chapter leader, and she's a strong fighter when it comes to protecting children. So I do want to give a shout out there. Um, so I guess
Yeah, and I'm trying to get her on the podcast too. She's gonna be coming on here in a few weeks, so we'll definitely hear from her.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's amazing. Um, so for me, so I've been the a chapter leader for New York State. Not too long. It's a more recent development. I actually stepped up to do that in was it I believe October
Okay.
of last year. So it hasn't been too long. But in that time, it's been a crazy journey because I've met so many people with so many stories, and I guess a good place to start is with my story. So a little bit of my personal story is I was an activist in the LGBT community for a number of years. I even marched on Washington D.C. So I was very much involved. Volunteered at my local Pride Center, interned at my local Pride Center. So I'm very much involved. Sat on Pride planning boards, or was involved, connected to them in some way, some fashion. Um, but then I noticed things start to shift in a direction I just couldn't go with. And that really was when the focus started to turn more towards children, especially when it came to children and sexuality, gender identity. I just couldn't, stand there and not respond to that. So I started speaking up. I started being skeptical of things, and of course, that did not make me any friends. It didn't keep any friends. I certainly lost a few. But honestly, that experience really taught me to appreciate quality of friendship over quantity. Um, and here I am today. I started speaking up about like children being exposed to drag, not supporting children transitioning. And I started getting a lot of pushback from the circles that I had run in for a long period of time. But more and more, I was like, I can't do this. And one transformative experience for me, I know when people think about pride events, they think a lot about like New York City or Miami or someplace over in California. Think of San Francisco, and I get that because those ones have been crazy for years. But keep in mind, I'm from upstate New York, So I live closer to like Albany than I do the city. And pride events up here historically have been more toned down. You wouldn't see a great deal of what you saw in the city. So for me, it came a little bit later, right? All that crazy, all that over sexualization, really being pushed happened a bit later than say New York City itself. Um, but I have to say things really started to change for me when my godson was born. My baby cousin, the pride following his birth, she decided to bring him out. She arrived at Pride, where she met up with me and my husband, and we got in line along the sidewalk, and I was holding my godson in my arms, and the parade started, and as people started to walk and I started seeing the different types of people that were in the parade, I realized that I suddenly was looking at the parade very differently. I wasn't looking at the parade as someone who was just there to celebrate, who was just there to have a good time. I suddenly looked at the parade, through the eyes of someone who now had a child in their life that they wanted to protect from harm. That they looked and they were like, "Okay, this is, not appropriate." So that was honestly, I think, one of the first shifts in my perspective when it comes to pride. Was the birth of my godson really did kind of refocus how I saw things, and not just pride, but in general, the world around me. I started, when I had my godson with me, it was like, oh, is this safe for kids? Is that safe for kids? So it really started to shift a great deal of how I saw things. So yeah, I'd have to say that was one of the big shifts. So I started then paying even closer attention, looking things up more. What was going on in the quote unquote community where children were concerned, and I started to see a growing list of things that I just could not stand by. Before even I had ever heard of Gays Against Groomers, I started speaking out, and eventually, when Gays Against Groomers was created, not too long after that, I actually, on a trip to Arkansas of all places, met someone who has become a friend in my life, Chris Barrett. He is the chapter leader for Missouri, and we became fast friends. And he encouraged me to join Gays Against Groomers, and I did. And the rest is history. Here I am today.
Yeah, and we recently met up in Albany where we were advocating for a number of issues for medical freedom, for I had a bunch of education focused issues, but
Mhm.
all surrounding children. And there was one bill in particular that we wanted to highlight for people that's really an example of exactly why I think, you got into fighting this fight specifically. And although I came to activism for different reasons, the transgender issue and the sexualization of kids has obviously been something where I'm like, okay, I have to spend at least some of my time focusing on this issue and talking about this issue. So I'm going to bring up this really good article from Teachers for Choice
Mhm.
that summarizes and highlights the bill for everybody so they can get it on their radar. And I'll let you talk a little bit about some of the other things that you're seeing at the state level, any other legislation or issues that you want to bring to people's attention. So these are the faces of three legislators that are sponsoring and pushing some interesting legislation, and that is Assembly Bill A 86761. And that would completely eliminate parents' right to know what is being done to their children. So, any age, they can be given drugs, right? Psychiatric drugs, vaccines, dental procedures, hospitalizations, surgeries, right? That includes these um, s- um, puberty blockers, which can sterilize you, that surgeries, mastectomies, and all different sorts of stuff without the parental consent. It allows Medicaid funds to pay for anything. Um, in fact, this is already the case for homeless children in New York State, right? They're basically in charge of their own healthcare because there's no parent for them, and they're also working on similar things to break down the parental consent in the school for kids who have Medicaid, right? And these healthcare facilities in schools.
Mhm.
So, I wanted to flag this, but I know you were, like, up there specifically for this bill, so t yeah, talk to me about it.
Yeah, so I mean, it really does go beyond that because yes, there is that, there is that bill, but there's also the fact that New York State is a sanctuary state for transitioning youth. We already know this. Kathy Hochul is proud of this. We also last year we had those updates regarding the education department and policies that are to be implemented in schools, such as, for example, that there is no requirement to for a school to inform parents of their children transitioning. So this isn't something new. It's not just about this bill. This bill is just kind of another step in what has already been going on. We've seen, for example, parents already lose custody of their children because not affirming gender. We've seen this in New York State. So this is just one more step. um and even on a local level, my a school board member uh in my local district actually proposed something to a policy, an amendment to a policy where students could start going by their chosen pronouns and names without it going on their permanent record. And the reason for this is because obviously parents can go to a school and request their child's permanent record, right? So it's
Mm,
something that is documented. So this individual wanted a way around that. So what she was proposing was that the school come up with a policy where children can, go by a different pronoun or by a different name, not officially recognized, by their permanent record, but by the school itself. And that way there's no way for the parents to find out. So yeah, it's just another part of a pattern that is honestly terrifying.
right, and I think that I hope, I guess, that by showing people the article that shows the legislation with the legislators and we
Mhm.
keep it focused on something that you can look at the piece of paper. It's a
Yeah.
law. Words clearly say
Mhm.
what they're trying to achieve rather than a lot of times it gets pushed into this culture war issue
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you're anti-trans," or "You're a hateful," or "You're a bigot." Whereas I really want people to see like, no, this is actual legislation that's being pushed through the state. And you had shared with me this article, and I hate the New York Post. There's like a million pop-ups, so excuse the all the pop-ups here. But it says dad claims ex-wife forced young son to gender transition despite his protests. It does say thankfully at the end of the article now the son is no longer doing that, but it was like a long battle for him, and he
Mhm.
had to spend $100,000 on legal fees, or 150,000. So these are real stories. This is one that was happening right here in New York State. This article just came out the beginning of the month. I know there's an ongoing one in California that's getting a decent amount of attention where it's the same thing where it's like, 2 parents are getting a divorced and the mother is saying that the son is actually a girl and the father's like, "No, my son is my son," but he doesn't have custody because he's denying the gender identity of the child, and the state recognizes the gender identity, the one who's affirming.
Yeah. So it's interesting because obviously one of the main things we need to do is start having conversations, right? As you said, we need to encourage people to go read the legislation to see for themselves exactly what is going on. And you're right, that's Absolutely correct. We need to start doing that. We need to be posting the links. We can post screenshots. But more than that, we need to start asking in a calm fashion, and a respectful fashion, uh, questions of the other side. So one of the questions I always start off with is I ask people, do you believe that children are capable of consent, specifically when it comes to their bodies? Now, this question and that phrasing hits people a certain way because I think that phrasing makes them understand the risk, the slippery slope that actually is very real, right? Because once we as a culture, in any fashion, say that children can consent when it comes to their bodies, in any fashion, how is it not very much a slippery slope that we progress in other directions when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's been pretty common sense from, uh, driver's license, there's a certain age, then it's rated R movies, buying cigarettes, drinking alcohol. There's all
Mhm.
certain things that as a society we've developed over time. And of course, there's always going to be some arbitrariness to it where we just say, okay, this is the cutoff. And there perhaps could be an argument one way or the other. I mean, drinking age used to be 18 and it moved to 21. So it's not that there's never inappropriate, or it's never appropriate to have a conversation about, okay, what is the right age for people to engage in this activity or to be able to consent. But certainly, the conversation is well established that that age is somewhere around 18 or 21 after they've gone through a good deal of development, both physical development, right, and social development. So that that people who are raising objections are the ones who are somehow
Yeah.
out of place, rather the ones who are making this,
And
big jump. I
I
mean,
know I yeah.
from
I never thought that we'd live in a culture where those who are standing firmly against the indoctrination, sexualization, and medicalization of children, the drugging and mutilation of children, would be the bad guys. But, those pushing this, they were clever in their approach. They come from a place of love and acceptance. And they say things, honestly, that to me is just personally, I do see it as at least downright evil manipulation. For example, saying to parents, would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter, trans daughter?
right.
Those type of things. They feed off the most primal fear of a parent, which is losing their child. And they feed off that fear, they use it to manipulate and take control.
And I
And
can
that is just infuriating.
Right, and I can certainly see again where it started off from a place of good intentions in the original LGB, even TQ movement, where if you're gay, right, or a lesbian, and you grow up in a place like how you said, I was upstate, these towns are kind of small, not every, it's to be different. It is nice to have a place where maybe you can try to understand who you are and why you're different from people and see that there is some representation out there. But so then when you take this idea and you stretch it to the point where you're now, I guess, like, it's almost like you're flipping it the other way, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you need to have some access, you need to have some representation, but it's not what everything is about. And that almost seems like what's happening. They're flipping it on its head. And we see it happen too, like sort of with the race stuff, right? It's like, okay, yeah, like representation's important. We need to talk about race. We need to have difficult conversations about our country's history, but also, like, it should probably come after the kids learn how to proficiently read and write and do math, right? Like
So let me clarify where I'm from. The town where I grew up in, where I graduated from, we have posts for the Amish to tie up their horses. So I certainly did not grow up in a city or even suburbia. All right, I grew up in the country and in small town life. That was my life.
Right, but
Now,
they
it's
never told your parents that, like, it's just like you from going from that to being like, "Your kid's gonna commit suicide if you don't let them, you know, take
well,
puberty blockers." It's a huge jump.
so first of all, let me because people try to combine, and this honestly was one of the most skillful moves that these individuals who pushed this did, right? They try to portray homosexuality, I am a homosexual man, as the same as being trans. It's the exact same
Mm,
thing, the exact
and
same
there's
experience.
that, yeah.
That is really a push for that. However, so one of the things that they throw at me when I say I absolutely am against children transitioning, I do not support, puberty blockers. I do not support surgeries on children or anything like that. They go, "Oh, so you don't support a kid being able to say that they are gay, right?" That is one of the ones they throw at me. And I'm like, "Okay, so where did I say that I don't support a child expressing gender confusion and possibly thinking that they are trans? I did not say that. But let me compare it. If a kid comes to me, so say a kid from my family were to come to me and a nephew per se, and said, "Uncle Kevin, I think I might be gay." Right? Right. Now, my response to that would be, "Okay, I understand this is a feeling that you're having, but this is something that you will discover more about yourself when you are an adult." Right? Okay, you may feel this. That's fine that you have, it's fine to have that feeling. It's fine to, if you think that about yourself, okay. But just continue to live your life as a kid and you'll figure things out when you're an adult, right?
Right, right.
So
How many
what I
things can
don't
you say that about,
Yes,
right?
what I wouldn't say to that boy is, "Well, go and affirm this identity by fooling around with another boy," right? So the same thing, right? I'm not saying that little boy can't feel that he might be gay, right? What I'm saying is I'm against any push to have him act on that to affirm it because that's wrong. It's disgusting to push a child to do something with their body to affirm something. I'm sorry, it is. So same thing. I'm not saying say another child came to me and goes, "Hey," a little boy says, "Hey, I feel that I might be a girl," right? I wouldn't then say, "Well, let's get you in a dress, let's get you transitioning, let's do that," right? I wouldn't say follow up with an action. I would say, "I understand you have this confusion. This is something you can absolutely talk about, but it's also something that once you're an adult it's something that you then can explore and really think about
Right.
as an adult," right? So that's one of the things when they try to throw that at me is that we're saying that kids can't express gender confusion. No,
Right, it's like,
we're not
sometimes it is
saying that at all.
confusing,
But
right?
I would say ask questions like this. If I had a little boy from my family say, "Uncle Kevin, I think I might be a girl." I'd be like, "Why do you think you're a girl? What makes you think you are a girl?" Because I think back to my childhood, and despite this facial hair, despite this look you see before you, I was most definitely a girly boy. I was much more feminine in my interests and all that stuff. I preferred to hang out with the little girls. I wanted to play with dolls. I preferred Disney princess. I preferred all these things. And here's the irony of it, and we'll get pushback on this, but we can find countless examples. Is that many of these individuals who are pushing for, transing the kids, right? They would under any other circumstances, they would be against gender norms. They would say gender norms are bad. Pushing gender norms is an awful thing, right? Or gender stereotypes. However, they use those same gender norms, those same gender stereotypes to say, yeah, this child is trans because Sally doesn't want to wear a dress and she screams and cries when you try to put a dress on her. She doesn't want her hair in ribbons and all that stuff. She's really upset by it. Or little Tommy really wants to play with dolls. He really wants to be a girl. When I was a kid and played house, I wanted to be the mommy for crying out loud because I liked the idea of taking care of kids. I didn't want to be the daddy because when you played house, the daddy went off to work and stuff. I wanted to to be the mommy. I wanted to take care of the kids. So, for example, let's use that example. If I were to ask that little boy, "Why do you think you're a girl?" And he were to say, "Well, I don't want to go to work, and and I want to stay home with the kids like a mommy." Okay, I would say, yes, in general, in the culture, often have we seen it be, the mommy stay at home and the daddy go to work. But just because you want that, that doesn't mean that you're a girl. That means that you just want to stay home when you're older and take care of the kids. Which
Right.
even that might change as you grow older, right? Even that might change. That little boy might decide that he doesn't want to do that. But that doesn't mean he's a girl. And another thing we need to have conversations about, I think more and more, and this is where I know we discussed going, is that we need to think back to our childhoods and think about were we, especially going through puberty, well, can we say that we all loved the changes that our bodies went through? I mean, I wasn't a fan of becoming Chewbacca, right? With the body hair and facial hair. That wasn't something I loved, right? I went, especially because I developed it earlier than the other boys. I started growing facial hair and chest hair earlier than the other boys. This made me feel like a freak. I hated it. And I think about that young kid that I was, and honestly, if that's what being a man meant at the time, becoming this like hairy creature that, that got picked on and all that stuff, why would I want anything to do with that? I hated it. And if someone had come along at that time in my life, unbeknownst to my parents, and said, "Hey, we can take that away. We can take that away from you." I probably would have taken that path. I'm gonna be honest, because I hated that. If that's what being a man meant, was to become a freak, was to feel uncomfortable in my body so much, right? Then why not become a woman then? Because I'm not comfortable with that aspect of
Right,
being a
and then
man.
not only that, you get showered upon with attention for being so
Mhm.
brave and
Love
courageous and
bombing. Yep.
right, and just, like, all this support from even from adults too, like, that are saying, "Yes, you're making the right move," and then on top of you also have these rebellious, uh
Mhm.
naturally at that age, right? You rebel against your parents, you want your independence, you're trying to find out who you are, and so it all just feeds into a cycle that in almost any other circumstance we would look at and say, "No, we're supposed to be doing the opposite as adults in these children's lives." And thank you for sharing that story, but and I just couldn't help as you were saying, it just is so similar to my own story.
Mhm.
Uh but sort of, I was a female and from a little age, trucks and blocks and, my mom would tell this story about from when I was in preschool, and the teacher was like, Stephanie, she plays with, like, trucks and blocks and all the and the boys," and my mom's like, "Well, what do the girls play with?" And she's like, "Oh, they do, like, house and dress up and dolls," and she's like, "Oh, yeah, well, Stephanie likes trucks and blocks," like, it's just that's just how she is. Um, and I remember, like, in 1st grade, I swore off dresses, and I didn't wear a dress again
Mm.
until my bat mitzvah when I was 12, dress like a boy, people would get me confused for Sunny all the time, but my mom, "No, that's just our daughter," My parents were
Yeah.
just like and it was even a stark contrast because I had 2 younger sisters, and they were girly girls, so they would be in their dresses, their sundresses, and I'd be in shorts and a t-shirt and a backwards cap, Um, so, yeah, I just and my mom, I felt like she was what people might consider super progressive, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh no, like women can be independent and they can be, there's a wide range of how women might express themselves and I could only imagine if the cultural milieu of the time was as such of now, right?
Yeah.
Where
Absolutely.
yeah, where when I'm feeling uncomfortable in my body and I'm dressing like a boy, people are like, "Well, you can actually become a boy." And, like, I think for a while, like, I actually did want to be a boy. It seemed cooler, you know?
And And that's all the more interesting because you talk about, being a tomboy when you were younger. Basically, I always joke and I say I'm the reason because I grew up with my cousin, my younger cousin living with me. We're about 4 years apart. And I always joke and say I'm the reason she was a tomboy because when we were little, she would get dolls. I would steal her dolls from her and give her my trucks because I wanted to play with the dolls. I didn't want to play with the trucks. And even when I did play with trucks, the trucks were talking to each other and having interactions. And I would even find a smaller vehicle and they'd have a baby, right? Like it was that desire to play in that fashion was so part of me where even if I was playing with trucks, the trucks were sentient and they were able to have families. Basically, I was playing cars well before the movie, right? And so I was very much that kid. And well, speaking of that cousin, because I have a story from our childhood together that I actually made a video on. When I was about 11 years old, so she would have been about 7. So she was like 6, 7. I was like 10 or 11 years old. My parents gave us each $10, right? So she's like 6, 7 years old. My parents gave us each $10. No,
Solid.
no,
Let's
no.
go.
Yeah, no. So they gave me 10 singles, right? They gave her a $10 bill. She went off screaming and shouting because from her perspective, I was given more money than her, right? Because I was given 10 singles. Physically, that's
Yep,
more
yep.
paper in my hand than what she had. And my parents tried to explain it to her, tried to say, no, it's the same amount, and all this stuff. Now, she just wasn't having any of it. I wanted the 10 singles not because I thought it was more money. I was old enough to understand that it was the same amount of money. I wanted the 10 singles because, and I'm aging myself here, I wanted to go down to the local store and get the penny candy, which was easier to do with $1. I know, I'm aging myself there, but I wanted to go and get the penny candy, which was easy to do to just give them $1 for 100 pieces of candy, right? But ultimately, it ended up because my baby cousin just could not be convinced of this, that it was the same amount of money. I gave her the 10 singles and I got the $10 bill. But so the point is, at 6 or 7 years old, she could not be convinced that 10 singles and a $10 bill were the same amount of money, right? She could
Right.
not be convinced of that. But someone's going to stand there and try to tell me that at that same age, she could make a decision that would impact the rest of her life?
Right.
Really? Is it about her body? That's what you're going to try to tell me? That same 6, 7-year-old girl who couldn't understand money, couldn't be made to understand money and how it worked at that time. Though she couldn't do that, but she could make a decision about her life, about her body. Come on now.
Yeah, I mean, all the time, my son believes in the tooth fairy and Santa Claus, like, his
Mm,
wall between what is real and what is imaginary is extremely fluid still, and that's a beautiful thing. It's a
yeah,
beautiful thing, but it also means quite clearly that they can't consent. And then even when kids do have a firmer grasp on, what is real and what is fake, say by the age 11, 12, and into, upper middle school and high school, they still don't have the ability to assess risk in a
mhm.
way that is meaningful, both from a
So
developmental standpoint and just from an experience standpoint. And again, that's why, generally speaking, we've put consent and we've put that direct parental involvement from a legal standpoint at the age of 18.
yeah.
For some kids, there might be some argument that it should
There
be
is argument. Well, I
higher.
mean, we know brain development. We're looking at that,
Yeah.
being done more around, we're looking at 25, 26, right? But that's another thing to ask people. Honestly, at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, if you were permitted to make any decision you wanted, be honest now. Think back to who you were at that point in your life. How bad would it be right now? How many tattoos or piercings or chain, like, what would you look like right now? Seriously, if you were
Right.
allowed to just make any decision at that time in your life.
And I'm, like, so grateful even in adulthood now because I feel like so much of my ability to do that judgment is, like, hearing my mom's voice in the back of my head being like, "No, don't do that," or like, "Hey, you should do that thing," you know? So,
Um,
like, that's where you learn to get your instincts is from that guidance you get from parents and mentors and coaches and teachers. It used to be at least it used to be that way, you know? There's still some good teachers out there, and really, like, I think that this is the more popular position. I think, like you said, it's about having conversations because there's a group on the other side that is very loud, and they're for some reason, they're aligned with the corporate interests, which then has a huge megaphone, I think that makes it seem like it's way bigger than it is, but
yeah,
regular people think like us.
I do want to specify that it's about having conversations with other adults. The only conversations that should ever be had with children, in my opinion, are what children ask about in general. Outside of that, like the ones you initiate are like, you need to have a discussion about stranger danger, good touch, bad touch. Those types of conversations need to absolutely be had. You need to initiate those, right? Or initiate conversations like, don't touch a hot stove, right? Those I get. But like any of these conversations about identity, why are you having them with a child that has asked no question about it? I actually, it's
Right,
funny. I get this from people across the political spectrum, different walks of life. They're asking me, I think my child might be gay, or I think my child might be trans. How should I approach it? And my first question is, well, has the child mentioned this at all to you? And often, most of the time, they'll actually say no. I'm like, let your child be a child. If they haven't brought something like this to you, why are you bringing it up? And it makes me think of my mother, God rest her soul. One of the things I am so thankful for is how my mother, even though she had certain feelings about me when I was a kid, like certain beliefs, she never pushed anything on me. And here's the thing. So after my mother passed, I found out some stories. Well, one of them I learned just before she passed, but the other one I found out after. One of them was that when I was very little, probably around 5 years old, and running and playing outside, apparently my mother leaned over to my father and said, I think he's going to be that way. I think he's going to like boys. And my father being like, oh, no, 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 all that, right? And mind you, I've seen videos of myself as a kid, and I always joke, and I'm like, I'm running and I can see the glitter and rainbow behind me. No, it's just like I was a very effeminate child, without question. That's that just is what it is.
don't worry, I was
Um,
the other way, so
I know. So
still am.
the next story is when I was about 14. My mother and my sister were having a conversation, and for some reason, my personal life came up, right? And my sister, who's older than me, said to my mother, "Oh, give him a few years. He's gonna find some woman, get her pregnant, get married, all that stuff." And my mother apparently said to my older sister, "No, not Kevin. He'll never be with a woman." Now, what did my mother do with these feelings that she had? Did she express homophobia, hatred, or did she try to affirm an identity that she perceived? No. You know what my mother did? She didn't talk about it at all. My mother never mentioned homosexuality to me in a negative or a positive way. My mother just let me grow up. And to me, that is the greatest gift my mother ever gave me is she let me be a kid. That's what she did. She just let me be a child, whether I was a girly child or, a masculine child. She let me be a child. And that is what I'm most thankful. Now, that same little boy I am terrified for that little boy here in 2024. In this era, I am terrified for that little boy.
Well, we there's a lot of bad bills out there that people can speak up and fight against, but right now in California, of all states,
Oh,
California, there is an initiative to get a question on the ballot that would require parental notification from school. So I'm gonna guess that this sort of like broadens the things that they need to uh, notify parents about or specifies like specifically about gender and identity, right? Protect girls' sports. And this is a big issue. So preventing boys or men who identify as girls from just entering into girls' play and putting them at risk. We've seen some pretty serious injuries happen in
Mhm.
volleyball, and I believe there was another one in, was it lacrosse, maybe? I can't remember. And then just not even when it comes to the injury, but just opportunities, right? From swimming to track and field. There's actually a really big case here in Connecticut that's happening. And then the biggest one is preventing that child sterilization. So that means
Mhm.
preventing giving kids the puberty blockers and other medications that can cause sterilization and other complications, and then the surgeries. So this is at protectkidsca.com, and you can download the petition. I don't know all exactly how the California process works, but go here. If you're in California, they'll explain to you everything, like how to get involved, how to donate, and more details about why to support this. And I think it's really interesting right here, the polling, right? Because like I was
Mhm.
saying, is that again, California is known as a deep blue state,
Yeah.
right? The most progressive state, or perhaps not the most. I mean, Oregon and Washington state are they're up there, but the biggest state, right? It's the biggest state in the country and one of the bluest, and yet there is broad bipartisan support.
Yeah. There absolutely is, and that's why at Gays Against Groomers, one of the things we say is we are not a political organization. We are, we have members from across the political spectrum, right? We have Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents. We have across because don't get me wrong, in certain political circles, there is more of a push of this, of course, but the majority of people still have that common sense, and they know that this push to say that a child can do something with their bodies, that children can consent to doing things with their bodies, on some deep level, they know it's wrong. Even the people that butt heads with me, I know on some of the level they know it's wrong because they usually end up blocking me or swearing at me, right? So that I love that they have those numbers up there because it just highlights that this is not. I mean, when you research gays against groomers, we come up as an alt-right anti-LGBT, Q organized, sorry, we call it alt-right anti-LGBTQ organization, right? Despite the fact that every single member of our organization is LGB or T, right? But then they try to press that apparently we are, so it's one of two things. We're secretly all heterosexuals, which damn, that's a lot of investment. If that sounds like a lot of investment if that were true. Or we're self-hating, which this I love because apparently I am a homosexual who is so self-hating that I married another man in 2015. So apparently, my homophobia, my internalized homophobia, knows no bounds. Because I married another man. I'm a, really, and then the founder of our organization, she's a lesbian, right? So it's just Jamie Mitchell, she who is amazing. We're looking at the ADL, for example, right? Recently, the ADL, Anti Defamation League, which should be focusing on anti Semitism specifically, it came to light that they wanted to use the power of government to silence many individuals, right? That they deem anti LGBT, and Jamie was included among those, and so were many others. And it's just funny, especially because not only is Jamie Mitchell a lesbian, she's also Jewish. So it's just very, very interesting how they try to twist reality to push their narrative. It's interesting, but it's also frightening, and people do need to wake up to it and understand that there is a great deal of support out there, more than they know. It's just right now the loudest voices have been really gifted at scaring people.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
I think we have to think also back to, like, what we tell our kids, right? Or what we
Mhm.
would give advice to our niece or a nephew or our godson and say, "You know, when that kid's being a bully at school, just tell 'em, you know, usually when you're the loudest voice, you're not really saying a lot of substance. You're
Yeah.
not listening to the people around you, or sticks and stones can break your bones," right? I'm not saying, of course, yeah, it can be scary sometimes to get called names or have these to be worried that somebody might think you are, homophobic or racist or, you know, insert slur here, right? That's,
Yeah.
nobody wants those accusations hurled at them. However, I mean, most people I don't think really have to worry about those things because it's so demonstrably false just from how they live their everyday life that it it has no power. These and it just shows their desperation. And so I think that it should be inspiration almost just to keep going, to speak louder. And yeah, I think sports is a great arena in order to have these conversations because
Absolutely.
it puts the differences in such a stark contrast.
But you also need to have these conversations, if you're going to engage in these discussions, have these conversations with the understanding of what is going to come back at you then too. Like, for example, we're talking about schools, right? And biological males taking part in girls' sports in schools, right? So when you bring up the fact that puberty has given these boys an advantage, right? Was but once puberty, I mean, there are teams that are mixed when we're very young. I played soccer when I was little, and it was mixed. Well, I was in ASO, American Youth Soccer Organization. I was in that, and that was mixed. But once we got to the age of puberty, no longer were those sports mixed, right? Because the changes. Now, what you need to be prepared for is that then they're going to say, well, doesn't that then justify puberty blockers? Because then we will stop that from taking. So they're going to try to insert it there. So you need to be prepared for that and push back against that because, like, no, you puberty blockers. First of all, we're talking about something that has been applied to, you know, deal with pedophiles and also address a serious health issue that impacts it, which is the precocious puberty, I believe, is the name of it. So basically an early onset puberty, which isn't healthy either. So they need to that child needs to take puberty blockers.
And there's it's not like that's without its consequences either, because I don't think
Exactly.
a lot of people really understand how puberty blockers work. It's not just like, "Oh, puberty's magically blocked." Like, no, there's other things that are still continuing to go on, and actually there's, like, this whole thing about, like, why trans people are so tall. A lot of times it has to do with the puberty blockers and the way it impacts the growth plates, and so, yeah, all these things are not without consequences. Like, you can't
Mhm.
just magically press a button, turn it on and off. Um, yeah, so there's many fallacies for sure with those types of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, there's just so many arguments that you have to be prepared for. So many things that are
You
going to
guys have
come.
some good resources over at Gays Against Groomers that people can refer to so that they can
Yeah, oh,
watch
absolutely.
through
Please,
these?
go to gaysagainstgroomers.com. There's a lot of resources there. You'll find a lot of tabs. We have articles, that are written by members highlighting everything from legislation to activism that is going on. Resources, regarding individuals who very much are invested in this and are willing to even, have advice for parents because parents obviously, my heart actually goes out the most to the parents because we have so many parents that are kind of caught in this, between that fear that's been instilled with them about losing a child to, basically being told that they're bigoted if they don't go along with it. So yeah, gaysagainstgroomers.com. Please check us out. Also, please follow us on social media. You can easily find us there as well. And just first reach out. Feel free to reach out as well. If you have a personal experience, something going on, feel free to reach out to us and we will definitely talk with you. It's sometimes that's what you need. I think a lot of people don't understand that they're not alone in their doubting of this ideology. I think they are, or they think they're a minority in regards to it. And that's because there's been a very successful grooming of the culture. At Gays Against Groomers, we focus on the grooming of children, but there is a larger grooming of the culture. And where that is found in is that when you speak out, when you question things, right, you get beat down, you get the stick, right? The
Right,
cancel
well, because
culture.
there's a lot of money in, like, these surgeries
Oh,
and in the
yes.
medical side of things. So
Mhm.
if you follow the money trail, it has a lot to do with the big pharma and the medical device companies, being able to basically cash in on these things. So I think that, yeah, it even goes beyond it's not just like cultural reactionaries. It's like, no, people with big money are paying people
Mhm.
to react in those ways or influence them to react in those ways.
Follow the money, and that goes to a lot of issues in our country. A lot of things being pushed. Follow the money. Look at that, and you'll see the true motivation behind a lot of things for
Yeah, the
sure.
Pritzker family, people might know Pritzker. He's the governor of one of those northern Midwest, states, but he's a governor and his brother is or sister or whatever, cousin, one of some family relation is now a transgender person and goes around. They have, like, this family organization that funds a lot of the research, so they have people in the government, they have people in private industry making billions of dollars, then they have all these nonprofits, so
Mhm.
follow the money.
Yep, and follow the studies too. That's another thing I do want to say quickly. You'll get studies thrown at you. Obviously, you can find studies for a lot of things, but I always say I try to use the wording studies suggest, but also who is backing these studies. If you're looking up a study on gender ideology in children, right? Gender in children. Um, if you see like the Trevor Project connected to it, research that. Like, pay attention to
Right,
who is financing these studies, because there's that bias there, right?
right.
It
And,
yeah,
like, what are
so
the
yeah.
methods that are being used on these studies?
Exactly.
You know, they might say what the results are, but it's like, okay, what were they actually testing for and how did they
Yeah.
test for it?
Is it
Um,
self-reported data? Is it a
yes.
blind study? How what
How
has
big
been the
is the
method?
sample size, right? A lot of times it's like
Exactly.
an incredibly small sample size or like they didn't actually follow them for an extended period of time, things that are just like, well, you can't actually draw any meaningful conclusions from any of this at all. So these
Mhm,
are all great tips. And I think like your story, I think data is great. Looking at the law is great. But our native language is stories, right? How
mhm,
how we transmit the most knowledge and information is through stories to each other, and you have a powerful story. I think I'm definitely gonna clip that and put it off as its own separate clip. And you have another video, people should go check out your channel where you talk about your story as well in other videos. I posted my story to Restore Childhood Substack about being a tomboy. I've talked about that on my channel before. So I think that those are powerful ways to share with people and say, "Hey, like, I want you to think about this from a different perspective." So like this is my story on Restore Childhood. I was a girl who wanted to be a boy and you could see like that my sisters like in these dresses and they're wearing like khaki t-shirt and I feel like just being able to see that is so powerful. Like it was cool, it was fine, it was accepted. Like in the 90s you could just be who you wanted to be and that was
Yep.
it. Like she's just a girl that dresses like a boy. Maybe she'll grow up to be gay, maybe she won't, that's just how it was. And then somewhere along the way, we just, I don't know, totally lost track of things.
Mhm,
But like that California ballot initiative, I have hope. As you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of bad bills here in New York State, but we've done a great job over the past few years really highlighting them and fighting them. And this is an election year. And so I'm feeling good about keeping the pressure on these people because we're a solid voting bloc. And like we
Mhm.
showed you, this is a moderate issue. There is a broad bipartisan base that supports these common sense policies that protect children. This isn't
Mhm.
anti-trans, this isn't hate, this isn't any of that. So I love the work that you're doing. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out. What are any last words you have for the people?
Honestly, well, as you said, talk. Everyone should be talking, but more specifically, um, I think you should also be reflecting. When think about who you were as a child. Think about those things that confused you. One of the other things that I actually am a proponent of, something I support is classes where more specifically anatomy and puberty is discussed with kids. And the reason why I actually do support that at an appropriate age, mind you, children who are adolescents who are about to enter that stage of development, is because growing up is so confusing. So I think that's another thing, like when we do educate on our development, is that this is something that's confusing. This is something that you won't always be happy with. What's these changes to your body, and you're not always going to have those interests that are normal to a boy or a girl, but that does not mean that you're actually the opposite sex. So
Right,
I
and I
think
would
that's another
I would
thing. Yeah,
encourage parents to have these conversations with
exactly.
their kids. Perhaps there's a place for schools in there, I don't know, I think that's a broader conversation, but
It is.
parents, if you're not having these conversations with your kids, somebody else will be, and,
Absolutely.
that usually isn't a good thing.
Just ask your child if gender has been brought up in their school and what's been said about it, and go from
No, for
there.
sure. Go,
Go
be
from there.
checking in on your schools, what's going in on the local scene, all of that good stuff. Well, I really appreciate Kevin. I really appreciate everybody out there. Make sure you've hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Let us know in the comments down below what is going on in your state. Is there any legislation we should have our eyes on at the state level? Do you have a story that you want to share with us? Because, like I said, I think stories are really one of the most powerful ways that we can fight back against this. And just remember, I love your beautiful face. To live free, we gotta think free. So do all that and give the glory to God. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you back here next Monday, same time, same place.